Hello, folks. I'm Trev Makes It Easy, the channel where we make learning easy. In this series, Trev on Econ, I'll be taking you through topics you're likely to run into in any introductory course in economics at the college or university level. My goal is to make economics less scary, more approachable, and, if I can, mildly enjoyable. With that being said, let's make it easy. Hello, folks. Today we're going to be working on our first set of government interventions, price floors and price ceilings. Now, government intervention is basically where the government doesn't like the equilibrium the market provides. So sometimes the market will give us an equilibrium, a price and a quantity that are just not ideal for what the society is trying to achieve. Usually, this means that consumers are getting something unfair. So this could be maybe a price is too high or a price is too low, but something that the consumers are dealing with in the market, or what the market is telling those consumers they should be paying or getting paid, is in some way unfair. So in an effort to promote equity over efficiency, or instead of efficiency, let's say, the government can step in and try to change the equilibrium. Now, this is not free. This is not something you could just do for no cost. Otherwise, the government should always intervene, and that's really not the case. But there are times where the government intervening is going to do a lot of good, and at least, again, maybe sacrifice some efficiency, but do a lot for the equity side and making things a little more fair for people. Now, there's lots of things we can do, or at least the government can do, to try and address this issue, but two of the more basic instruments, and I will honestly tell you they're very blunt instruments. They're not the best things we could do, but we have what's called price floors and price ceilings. So we're going to do these in tandem. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to set up two supply and demands like we normally do, and we're going to effectively show what happens when these things take place, as well as what these things actually are. So both of them will start from the normal supply and demand graph we always do, like so. And we'll make a second one, copy and paste that. And we'll kind of do these simultaneously. So on the right, or on the left, I guess that's more normal to say, we'll have the price floor example. And over here, we will have the price ceiling example. Now, the nice thing is, just like everything in economics, what we do one way is going to be the opposite the other way. So once we know how one of them works, we'll have a pretty good idea of how the other works, because we're basically just going to change the direction or maybe the curve that's being affected, right? So before we do any of that, let's talk about what these things are, okay? A price floor is a legal minimum that prices can be. So these are saying you can charge at this level or above, but like any floor, you can't go below the floor. It's a stopgap. Over here, though, the ceiling is just the opposite. A price ceiling is a legal maximum that prices can be. So it's just the opposite. Floor, I can't go below, but ceiling, I can go below it, but I can't go above it. Again, it acts like a ceiling. Now, we have to be careful, because where the floor and the ceiling go is a little misleading based on their name, right? Most of us would say, oh, the ceiling goes up, floor goes down, pretty simple, and it's really not going to work that way. So for both of these, the goal is to exclude the market equilibrium, right? And we'll even write that over here because it's the same thing. The goal is to exclude the market equilibrium. Meaning, I want to make it so that we are unable to get to this center point like we always want to, right? That's our normal. We want to get there and life is good. But the floor and the ceiling are trying to prevent that. Now, let's look at the floor first. And a floor is just going to be a straight line, like so. And I'm going to move this around, and we're going to talk about what it means in different areas. So a lot of people, when we say floor, their first instinct is, oh, the floor should be down here, okay? And that makes sense, right? Floors are below us, so we should probably go below the equilibrium of the floor. The problem is if we look at this situation and considering what's happening now, we have to ask ourselves, are we excluding the market equilibrium? Well, remember, a floor says you can go anywhere above it, but you can't go below it. In this case, if I leave the floor here, I can go anywhere above the floor. But anywhere above the floor includes the equilibrium, which is no good. Because if I put the floor on the bottom and the equilibrium is accessible still, I'll just go to the equilibrium. The floor does nothing. We sometimes call it a non-binding floor. So for the floor to be effective, it actually has to go above equilibrium. Because now my equilibrium's here, my floor is here, and it's protecting the equilibrium from prices reaching that. So this is where an effective floor is. So to say that, an effective floor goes above equilibrium, right? If it is below, it does nothing, and you just go to equilibrium, right? This is a really good trick on tests. Again, depends on your school, teacher, course, etc. But I've seen this one a lot where people will put the floor in the wrong spot, and then students will say, oh, well, there's a floor. I have to obey it. You only have to obey the floor if it's in the right spot. So if it's above like this picture, then sure, you have to listen to what it says. But if they trick you and put it on the bottom, it actually doesn't even exist. You can basically ignore it completely and just go to equilibrium. Now for ceilings, you can kind of guess it's probably the same issue, right? A ceiling normally would go up here in most people's minds, but remember, a ceiling is a maximum, meaning I can go below the ceiling, but I can't go above it. So if my equilibrium is here and the ceiling's here, well, I can go to that equilibrium. You're not stopping me. So for it to be effective, I need my equilibrium to be down here. Or sorry, my ceiling. All right, because again, what happens? Well, I can go below this, but my equilibrium is up here. So again, I can't get to that spot even if I want to. So very similarly, we get the same outcome. Okay, an effective ceiling goes below equilibrium. And again, if it is above, it does nothing, and you just go to EQ. Right? So watch out for that one. Again, it's a very common trick to put them in the wrong spot just to try and throw people off. Now, we've put in our floor and our ceiling. What does that mean for us? Well, a couple things happen now. The first thing is, remember, we talked about this in one of the previous videos, but when you have a mismatch like this, right, it creates a couple things. The first one is that this creates a surplus. That's something we talked about way back then, right? Basically, too much stuff. And all that means is that my quantity supplied is bigger than my quantity demanded. The price is higher than it should be. It's higher than equilibrium. So people are excited to sell, but not many people want to buy. Now on the inverse of that, down below, we get the other term we've used before, which is a shortage, right? If you set the bar too low, you get the opposite problem, which is a shortage where there's too much demand and not enough supply. Right? And those have their own problems. Again, normally the price would adjust to make that go away. But if price can't adjust any lower or higher, because again, these floors and ceilings, well then guess what? You just can't do anything about it, right? The other thing we get from this is, remember, with things like shortages and surpluses, how we hit the demand and the supply, we only really care about the first thing we hit. So for example, let's take a light blue here. In the floor example, I'm hitting my demand curve right here before my supply curve. So I don't even care that we get this far into supply because I'm always limited by what curve we hit first. If you don't remember what I'm talking about, make sure you go watch my video on producer and consumer surplus because we really introduced that topic there. We do the same thing, okay? Over here, we're limited by supply, but again, we get the same sort of outcome, right? Where again, I don't care how much demand there is, I can only sell up until this blue line. But wait, all of a sudden, this starts to look like, again, something we talked about in the last video, which is we've divided this left triangle up into those different areas. Now, hopefully you remember these, but this is CS, consumer surplus. This is PS, producer surplus, and this is DWL, that deadweight loss. Over here's the same letters in the same spots, but the shapes look different. So we've got CS on top, PS on the bottom, and DWL off to the side here. Right? So we can further just quickly mention that floors create lower, actually let's do it like this, lower consumer surplus. All right, I can for sure tell you the consumer surplus is lower than if it was at equilibrium. It probably adds to producer surplus. Again, sometimes you can be so extreme that it actually ends up making producer surplus less. It just becomes tall and really skinny. But based on this picture, it's probably going to be a bigger producer surplus. Again, not guaranteed. That one you can't really tell until you actually calculate some things. But the big one, it creates a DWL, right? A deadweight loss. Over here, same idea, just different directions. Ceilings create, number one, it probably adds to consumer surplus, kind of the same issue. Consumer surplus is likely getting bigger, but in a very extreme case of floors and ceilings, it might get actually smaller than at equilibrium. Number two, it does lower producer surplus. That one is for sure true. And three, again, it creates a deadweight loss, right? Now, the problem here is that, again, deadweight loss is not good, right? In both of these cases, they're inefficient. Floors are inefficient. They trade efficiency for equity, which we already kind of mentioned, but it's good to reiterate. Ceilings have the same issue. Okay. So again, why would we use something like this if they're inefficient? Well, again, economics isn't just about efficiency. Efficiency is a big part, but there is a give and take between efficiency and equity. Sometimes we have to sacrifice efficiency to be more fair. Sometimes we have to sacrifice fairness to be more efficient. It's very dependent, but again, different things call for different measures. Now, are these perfect tools? Again, absolutely not. They're very simple. And not that there's anything wrong with simple, but simple is definitely something that comes with potential problems, right? Now, does making them more complex help? Potentially. And in later videos, we might discuss some other interventions that do a better job, we'll say, of dealing with some of the downsides of floors and ceilings. Now, the real question is, where do we see these in real life? Because it's always nice to talk about the models, but we should probably have a good sense of where we actually might see something like this in the real world. Well, a price floor is kind of an interesting one because that's where the government says, hey, you're trying to pay these people or sell something to these people for too low of a price. You have to charge a higher price. And in fact, a really good example of this, and it depends where you are in the world, not all countries have this, is minimum wage law. Right? A minimum wage law is a perfect example of a price floor because your employer might want to pay you $2 an hour. That might be the market equilibrium. But the government comes along and says, no, that's not fair, right? That might be efficient, but there's an equity portion, right? People can't live on that wage. People will probably be working poor, which is where you work and still are in poverty. This is not a good wage for society. So they implement a floor that says, no, you want to charge this or pay people this, but you have to pay them this higher number. Now, is this perfect? No, absolutely not. There's a lot of downsides and upside to minimum wage, right? We might talk about those in a later video, but minimum wage is a price floor. It is a price floor on labor where you say the price of labor is this minimum amount. You cannot go below this minimum amount. Again, some countries, Canada and the States, they have very unique rules around this sometimes, but it is a minimum on labor. Ceilings, honestly, not used as much, I would argue, but a really good example of ceilings would be something like rent control, right? You might live in a place where the rent is exorbitant. Maybe it's cheap. Right now, as we're recording this video, housing is incredibly expensive, all right? Maybe, hopefully not when you're watching it. However, rent control is a really good way of creating a price ceiling because what you're doing is saying, hey, the market wants to make you pay this much for perhaps rent, or we'll stick with rent, for rental payments, right? Maybe it's something ridiculous, $10,000 a month, right? That would be the efficient market equilibrium that the market tries to get to. The problem is that is, again, unlivable for most of society. People would be homeless. They would have issues securing housing or staying in housing. And even though that's already an issue, it would just be exacerbated. So what we try to do is say, okay, again, I know you want to charge this for rent, but I'm going to say you cannot. I'm going to put a ceiling down here and say, this is the maximum you can actually charge, right? So I try to go to the highest level I can. But again, I'm never going to be able to reach that equilibrium that I'm seeking after. Both tools are actually pretty common to be used. Minimum wage law, rent control law, these are things we see in a lot of areas of the world. And again, even though there's downsides to floor and ceilings, they must do a decent enough job in the real world for us to still consider using laws like this. Now, again, are there ways to make them better? Absolutely. Maybe down the line, if people are interested, leave a comment below and we might talk about minimum wage law, rent control law, etc., and talk about some of those upsides and downsides I've kind of been alluding to. These are two very important topics. Again, they're very common topics as well, but they're also topics where you can get a lot of information and marks on tests by knowing these models just because they're very dense and they include a lot of topics we've already talked about. Surpluses, shortages, consumer producer surplus, deadweight loss, supply and demand. They're a culmination of a lot of things we've done so far. So I encourage you to spend some time with these because they're simple models, but they are very useful and again, often tested, especially in early level courses. With that being said, hopefully this is an informative video. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Well, folks, that wraps up another lesson for today. I hope it was helpful. If you found the video valuable, please make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions about the content or requests for other topics or subjects you'd like me to cover, please leave a comment below. Until next time, keep learning and make it easy.